We are now going to be having a panel discussion on implementing a low carbon growth path. I have an amazing panelist that everybody should pay attention to because I'm very excited. Not that it's just a panel of women, but it's a panel of powerful, powerful individuals that are taking over the marketplace and are really doing justice to the topic that we're about to discuss. Um, Once again, allow me to remind you to hashtag SAS Summit 2020 on social media. Please also in the interim do visit our 3D exhibition expo because you will stand a chance to win some prizes there. And we'll be making a couple of announcements towards the end of our first day. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our following panel discussion. It's called Implementing a Low Carbon Growth Path. We know that discussions around carbon emissions have been quite rigorous and broad, and of course, this is concomitant to issues of climate change and how climate change is becoming an economic issue. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Litiboho Makele, who's the manager of Sustainable Cities program at SA Cities Network. I also wish to welcome Frans Dekker, who is the managing director of the South African Institute of Architectural Technologists. Allow me to also welcome Charles. Oh, Charles is not present, but if he does join us, then we'll have him with us. But he's the president of the South African Council of Architectural Profession. Also, welcome to Keta Zulu, if he or she is present. He is the chairperson of the South African Council for Planners. We also have Jessica Ramchund, who is the lead engineer of developments at Bosch Projects, Pty Ltd. I hope I welcomed everybody. How are you all? Is everybody okay? Can we have the brief introductions as well? And of course, your inputs on the subject matter. Perhaps let's start with the roses among the thorns. I don't want to say thorns among the roses. So can we have Frans Dekker, if you can just introduce yourself and the organization and what you think about implementing a low carbon growth path.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Frans Dekker. As I was introduced, I'm the MD of the South African Institute of Architectural Technologists, their previous president, being heavily involved in standards writing, especially where it comes to energy efficiency and energy using buildings since 2009. I was part of the committee that wrote the current XA and 204, and also chairing the committee that actually just did the second edition of XA. I'm also chairing another committee on energy efficiency as well. Low carbon, yes. I think that is necessary, and as architectural professionals, we should actually engage quite heavily in that. And that is one of the reasons why I myself and we as an organization became involved about 10 years ago in actually making sure that we can set or help set the minimum standards to which buildings have to comply with nationally to basically to comply with the I think it was a Kyoto protocol that was signed to reduce then carbon footprints in buildings in South Africa, especially the new buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dekker. Can we have Litibo?
Thank you very much, Thabang. And good morning to the panelists and good morning, everyone. I am Diteboho Makele. I am Program Manager, Sustainable Cities at the South African Cities Network, which is a network of metropolitan municipalities in the country. We work together with our partners to provide a platform for research, for knowledge exchange and innovation, for peer-to-peer learning on best practices in urban development and city management. And we support our participating cities in their efforts to achieve the urban futures outlined in the National Development Plan, Vision 2030, and in the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is the urban policy for the country. So I will be speaking from that perspective, from the perspective of the South African Cities Network and our participating cities. So this transition to low carbon economies in the country. For me, it starts with Chapter 5 of the National Development Plan, which puts forward this vision of what a transition to a low carbon resilient economy and just society will look like in 2030 in South Africa. It lays out this ideal of what should be happening in 2030, but with a caveat that we need to take the difficult steps to adjust. And it acknowledges the challenges that we're going to face in that transitions and the trade-offs that we would need to make. And so it was put in place in 2013, the NDP, and it set out the agenda, so to speak, for 2030. So my question today is around where are we in that transition? And those are the things that we'll be discussing today. Where are we in that transition to a low carbon resilient economy? And what trade-offs have we made or are we making? And what are the challenges that we still need to overcome? So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. Morning, Tabang. Morning, panelists, and morning, attendees. I'm Jessica Ramchand. I'm a professional civil engineer, and today I'm representing the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, SAICI. I'm also part of SAICI's Sustainable Development Committee. I'm a lead engineer at Bosch Projects. Bosch Projects is a multidisciplinary consulting engineering firm where I focus on water, wastewater, and integrated development projects. From a SAICI perspective, SAICI is a voluntary association that serves to advocate professional knowledge and also improve the practice of civil engineering in South Africa, and has also contributed to the Sustainability Handbook for 2020. And as South Africans, we are the 14th largest contributor to greenhouse gases globally, and buildings and its associated infrastructure contributes at least 37% of the carbon emissions by sector. So on this backdrop, and acknowledging the key role that civil engineering plays in enhancing our daily lives, SAICI is a key advocate for the 17 SDGs that we talked about in the previous session, but also in achieving South Africa's NDCs. So civil engineering has a really significant governments and private sector and the DFIs to fund green and to fund low carbon. Also, as Frans talked about earlier, was the migration to renewable energy and promoting energy efficiencies, but then also looking at enabling climate resilient and smart agriculture, taking into account the food, water, energy nexus, and particularly my passion, building low carbon cities with low carbon infrastructure. So I'm really excited to be part of the conversation. Back to you, Taban.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Truly, we are also quite excited to be engaging on this crucial topic, and you certainly have given us a head start towards that. Charles, welcome. Can you
Thank you.
Introduce yourself and
Okay.
around plan?
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat again? You lost me there.
Okay, Charles. Now I was just saying, can you kindly just introduce yourself,
Yes.
your organization, and sentiments that you would like to share around implementing a low carbon growth plan?
All right. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Charles Ndugu. I am the current president of South African Council for Architectural Profession. Yes, as you know, architects are key in this topic. Definitely the design is key and the construction is key, but it starts with the design before we go to the construction, and therefore architects are central to the implementation of this initiative. And this has been around for quite some time now, and I don't know whether it is progressing or it is regressing. At the moment, I know for a fact that there was a Green Building Council which was established. I don't know whether it is still functional, but those were good initiatives. and we're looking forward to see the implementation of the sustainable green building practices in the country, because as you know, that we are faced with this COVID-19 pandemic, and then we don't know what is coming in the future. I think what is wise is to just look at going back to the basics. Let us use just passive designs, and avoid having to rely on mechanically generated or maybe controlled energy efficiency and all of that. Because I mean, if we rely on that, we're using a lot of the gadgets. I think we won't be doing ourselves a favor. I think we must have learned a lot during the COVID-19, that I think we need to go back to the basics. We need to ask ourselves simple questions as to what are those basic principles that we need to put in place, where are we going to look at in terms of implementation. I'm talking about our municipalities and our authorities that can assist in implementing those. I mean, the guidelines that needs to be given to the designers to follow, during the design stage, so that we get everything in place before we think about it during the construction. So I'm looking forward to the progress. I would like to know, how far have we gone, in implementing those. I mean, in as far, I don't know if we have anyone who can speak on behalf of the authorities, municipalities, amongst ourselves, and the other authorities, but I'm just looking forward to see how far and what can be done to actually implement all of these principles, so that we can achieve a carbon-free sort of environment, or reduction. There won't be no carbon-free, but a reduction of the carbon footprint in our environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nduku. I think let me go to Tibuho. I have a major concern of government's agenda towards urbanization. There's nothing wrong with urbanization, but my question to you would be, how do we, or rather, does urbanization contribute to having low carbon emissions, or how does urbanization perhaps contribute to the agenda towards low carbon emissions? Because we've got a lot of infrastructure involved, we've got a lot of engineering involved around developing urban cities, and we know that with urbanization, there's also a lot of movement from people coming into the city, and so pollution and so forth starts developing. So how can urbanization contribute to low carbon emissions, or the plan towards that thereof?
Okay, thank you for that question, Tabang. So urbanization presents both challenges and opportunities. Right. And I think it's important for cities to look at the opportunities that it presents. As people are moving in, as the population is increasing, there are challenges of where are we going to locate these people, what infrastructure provision are we going to give them, because we already have backlogs. But it's an opportunity for new pathways to be charted. So there's an opportunity to look at how can we provide the same level of services, but in low carbon ways, in different and alternative ways to the traditional practices. So we need to look at engineering solutions that are low carbon, that contribute to sustainability, and that do not deplete the limited resources that we have. We need to look at the way that land is used and land is packaged to address the challenges of rapid urbanization. So we need to look at how do we incorporate green infrastructure in the way that we develop settlements and our cities as we're responding to the challenges that rapid urbanization presents. We need to look at our resources. We're a water scarce country. How can we look at what approaches can we put in place that will not deplete the already diminishing resources that we have? There are many engineering solutions, there are different approaches that we can take in terms of spatial planning, in terms of waste management, in terms of climate change adaptation that are low carbon and that will lead us to the future that the NDP espouses. But like I said in the beginning, there are steps that we need to take that are difficult at this stage, but that will give us the required outcomes that we want. So if we can make those tough decisions now and say from today, this is how we're going to provide infrastructure. We're not going to do it in the traditional resource intensive and traditional engineering solutions that we've used in the past because they're not giving us the results that we want and they're not going to address the challenges that we see. So if we can shift that, that would advance us in a more rapid way to becoming more sustainable, to becoming more low carbon and resilient. So we need to really make those decisions that will enable our cities to do that. And we're seeing that gradually happening. So cities realize that first they need to look at the institutional and governance barriers that limit them from putting in place those interventions that they know. I mean, we don't lack capacity in our cities. We've got very talented professionals, engineers, urban planners across the range of the sectors that we have in our cities. We've got very educated and capable people. The system needs to change and adapt to the challenges that we face. And those things we're starting to see happening in cities. So I'll leave it there for now and then get more inputs from the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just quickly, Mr. Decker, from an architectural perspective, what does green infrastructure look like? And how do we build low carbon cities from an architectural perspective? And then after Mr. Decker, we'll have Jessica to answer other questions. Mr. Decker?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's actually a very difficult question. For me, to be honest with you, and I'm going to say it like it is, I think this low carbon, the idea is good, everything is there, but it's not out there where we build houses, where we build infrastructure. Maybe here and there where it's a prestige building for a big company, etc. A lot of these things are taken into consideration. But I'm from the rural area in KwaZulu-Natal, and I can tell you, and if even in my own town where I stay, I can just go around, and a lot of people don't care about what is going to happen in the future. They don't care about laws that are already there trying to reduce CO2 emissions, the building regulations, etc. Local authorities, some of them are actually just ignorant of that. I know of big local authorities just say that they're not going to implement the minimum requirements of the building regulations when it comes to CO2 emissions and trying to lower that. So I'm a little bit, to be honest with you, skeptical. It's good that it's there, but there's still a lot of work to be done at grassroots level, informing not the professionals so as much, but more the clients, the homeowners, the building owners out there about what is supposed to be done and why it needs to be done, etc. Unfortunately, when XI was published in 2011, I'm talking about 10,400 XI together with the building regulation XI that deals with energy usage in buildings. It was seen as a tool by a lot of local authorities just to make sure that certain things are done across the boxes, and then everything is honky dory. And nobody, and I still believe that, has actually got take a deeper think deeper than what they actually must do, etc. And that is why I got involved with this about 10 years ago, and I'm still actively involved in that and trying to make statutory requirements as simple as can be, so that it can be implemented by everyone, and not actually create what can I call it, a stumble block in the way of further development. Because yes, people want to want to own houses, etc. There are a lot of new technologies that are on the market today that will enhance this whole idea of CO2, lessen the CO2 emissions, etc. But we still sit with a type of cultural, socio-economic type of approach to what a building is and what a building should be. So the moment you walk away from traditional building methods, something new that will enhance this whole CO2 reduction, a reduction in CO2 emissions, you're actually getting it's a stumble block. People see that, and I'm very frank to say it here, but there's a lot of people, clients that I deal with on a daily basis, see that as a stumble block in their way and what they want to do. They don't understand the reasons why. And I think there is not a lot of education regarding what is the purpose of a lot of these things, especially when it comes to our buildings. Yes, we might have the, and I know our regulations regarding energy efficiency, especially the second edition that's on its way, do take a lot of these things in question. And if we can just adhere to the minimum, then we would have achieved quite a lot. But to get to that minimum and get everybody to work together to get to that minimum compliance level, I think that is a great problem at the moment. Um, in 2010 to 2013, we as an organization were funded by the Swiss government. That is when XA was published at that stage, to basically to educate local authorities, and we went all around the country to do that. And I can't see the result today. If I speak to local authorities, especially the building control people, it was not sustainable. With other words, there in very few of the local authorities, people took over the initiative of training their colleagues, etc. And the guys that were trained in 2011 to 2013 left the employ of the local authorities, and it's new people in there. And unfortunately, going green is also a marketing fuffy. Um, so a lot of people will come to you with green things and say, "Oh, it's green here and green there," but further investigation actually reveals that it's not so green and it's actually just a money making scheme. So, and
Mm.
unfortunately, that's the other side of it. We can talk about green building design, we can talk about lowering the CO2 emissions, but in all of them, there are always a lot of people that actually want to make a few bucks out of it and actually produce something that is not so green and not so friendly towards our earth.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Decker. There, Jessica, just inferred from some of the inputs that Mr. Decker outlined. Can you perhaps tell us what does a low carbon future look like? Because I must concur with you there, Mr. Decker, where we throw around these terms, but there isn't a sense of conscientization that people have. You speak about solar energy in a township, they'll look at you and say, "What are you talking about? What do you mean we need to have solar panels? How does that work?" And it's not to say they are ignorant, but it's also to say that from a maybe governance point of view, private sector point of view, there aren't any solid synergies that could, conscientize people around alternative energy supplies. The green infrastructure, like we say, we can speak about the benefits, but people don't really know about it. And I think the health benefits, particularly, of developing green infrastructures and developing this green economy, are insurmountable, but we don't really know about it. So, Jessica, what does a low carbon future look like?
Thanks, Savan. I think so. Just to, I'll start on your last question around what does this low carbon future look like? And I think one of the big misconceptions that we have around the kind of future we want to see is that we keep talking smart and green and we keep talking about them interchangeably. But I think the concept around smart is that smart doesn't necessarily always have to be techy. And smart needs to be appropriate for the situation at hand. So smart for New York will be different for smart for rural KZN, for instance. And it's appropriate solutions and that appropriate technology adoption. And the other thing is, I think when we think infrastructure development and the development of cities or slum upgrading or informal settlement upgrading, for instance, we always think big because that's how we've grown to think around centralized systems. One of the other barriers of entry is how do we think local and think small and incremental? To come back to what you were talking about was what we need is we need the critical systems thinking. So a fundamental psychological shift in how we think about infrastructure, how we think about cities development, and also how we think about what people need. So traditionally, we are a very gray infrastructure country and a gray infrastructure continent. So there's a few things that we'll need to realign so that we can try and envisage this low carbon future that we keep talking about. And what we need is an enabling environment, the creation of an enabling environment, public awareness, public education, and also professional awareness and professional education, because we also always say that the public don't know what they want, but it's also about how we as the professionals who are the custodians of these sectors actually deliver what's required. And I believe that this can be done through, we'll call it a lean approach. So a top-down, bottom-up approach to development and infrastructure delivery. And I think it can be done in 4 parts. And the one is that it's aimed at the infrastructure developers themselves. So a big component of infrastructure development is driven by government, but there's also private sector developers. And it's to mandate the low carbon imperative as part of their plans. And this has to happen at the master planning stages to development. And it then can cascade down to the individual building level. But what we also need is an enabling procurement environment, the kind of environment that doesn't just always prioritize lowest cost, and that it looks at the holistic picture. And the second would be the teams who deliver that infrastructure. So professionals such as myself, where we prioritize responsible and green development as a matter of everyday business, and as how we do things, not just because the client asked or didn't ask for it. Professional, it should be an ethical responsibility to be able to do this. The third would be to plan with the whole life cycle in mind. And that includes our planning, our design, construction technologies, our material selections, and technology itself. But finally, to also have these conversations between the disciplines, because what we often do is we have the silo mentality, engineers doing the engineering and the urban planners and the architects and everyone almost operating by themselves. And we need to be able to have these cross conversations so that because we ideally affect an integrated system. And then finally, it's the end user and the beneficiary of the infrastructure to actually demand a low carbon product or a sustainably developed good or service. And I think that comes down to the education in terms of whether people are aware of the differences that will come through not thinking of the whole life cycle, like how much will it will be cheap to buy something, but how much will it cost me to run it over its lifetime? And I think that sometimes we're very capital focused and not operation and maintenance focused. And that's something that we sort of need to change. But I think what we also need to understand is that we've got structural societal challenges in South Africa, particularly in Africa too. South Africa, we're the most unequal society. So being able to build is much more meaningful in our context than it would mean for converting gray infrastructure to green infrastructure, where we have the opportunity right now to leapfrog from no infrastructure to green or to low carbon. And I think that's where the real benefit.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Mr. Nduku, can you just tell us what are the innovative measures that we can use to reduce, the carbon emissions? I'm sure you have delivered some of the, projects, or you have witnessed some of the projects that have been done by the architectural profession. So, in answering that, and maybe in giving us one example around What are the initiatives that your organization has introduced? What innovative measures can we use to reduce carbon emissions according to your perspective? And then after you will then have Mr. Zulu also answering one or two questions just before we wrap up in the next 20 minutes. Over to you, Charles.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. There's quite a lot of innovations one can use. I mean, to firstly look at I like to do things or to approach things in a simple way. For an example, you start with the basic things of I wouldn't call it an innovator or innovation or innovative approach. It's just to be as simple as possible. Go back to the basics. Use the materials in its natural forms. Because if you use the material in its natural form, you're looking at the life cycle, which is longer in a building. You're not adding any other, sort of elements that will bring in the maintenance cost. So those are the main things that you need to look at, and also looking at just utilize the basic principles of design in terms of understanding the position of the building on site. What sort of access do you lay out your building? I mean, how long it must face north? I mean, what sort of ventilation? How to ventilate naturally? To make sure that you understand. I mean, a proper site analysis. That is the basic. I mean, I wouldn't say it's innovation. Analyze the site properly. Understand what sort of position you want to place your building in order to maximize the natural ventilation, in order to harvest natural lighting, in order to harvest sunshine and reduce the energy use in the building. And also, I mean, you take that and link it to the sustainable life of living. I mean, if you just go down to the way of sustainable life, and then you link that to the way we live life sustainable, which is not in existence at the moment. I mean, which links back to the way our cities are planned at the moment, which is not sustainable. I mean, this thing links to another problems of the way of living. So there has been quite some initiatives in terms of where you can use thermal insulation, where you can, I mean, you use thermal in your walls. You change, you run away from the use of your brick. You just work on the new materials that are actually in place now, alternative materials that are giving you more thermal capacity than using your brick that is uses cement, a lot of energy that needs to be, I mean, transportation. You avoid all of those things. I wouldn't call that innovation, rather than evolution of the material. I think we need to be able to look forward to the future rather than holding on to the materials that are not assisting us in as far as improving the carbon footprint or reducing the carbon footprint in the built environment. So I know we have gadgets that are available, solar panels that are used, but I mean, what we can actually opt for is those ones that are not using too much energy, just to sort of assist the environment and the comfortness of the building, the solar harvesting to reduce the use of the energy of the building. But for an example, I've designed my building I created ducts through the building so that I can have the natural airflow, and then before I even think of using air conditioners, and also to look at how do you look at the waste of water? How do you reuse the water that from the showers, how do you store it, and all of those things. But those are the basic things that I would not want to call those in innovative sort of principles, but those are just the basic principles which I believe in as a person, rather than, and we are a third world country, and I'm not saying we should not look to the best or maybe most innovative ways of dealing with this problem. But I think let's start with the basics. Let's just get things right first, so that we can actually respond to our local needs. I mean, before we look outside. So I mean, the issue of looking at the between the green fields and brownfields. I mean, when you choose, you choose between the two. You look at the brownfield before you look at the greenfield, so that to avoid urban sprawl. So those are the basic principles that we need to implement in our country, because you can see our cities are growing bigger, and they're sprawling, and then inside the CBD is decaying because people are moving out of that. And before we do that, I think we need to look at fixing the center of our cities, the centers of our cities. So in a nutshell, I wouldn't really say that they are more or any in a local context that we should look at the hyper or high techs innovative ways of addressing this issue, other than sticking to the basics, other than looking at the basics that we've overlooked and then jumped for these new innovative ways that are coming, and then we end up having to create problems for our environment.
Thank you very much. Makeba, Mr. Zulu, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Yes, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? How is everyone?
Very well, thank you. Just quickly, we see that you are the chairperson of the South African Council for Planners. What are the current projects that the organization has done or are doing to address sustainability?
Okay, thanks. I think I must indicate, must I get my camera on?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thanks very much, Program Director. And I must indicate I've joined the session a bit late. I've just recently joined, but I followed what the other colleagues were talking about. I think I just need to give the context with the South African Council for Planners. It's a regulatory body for the profession. So specifically, there won't be projects, sustainability or otherwise that the council will initiate. However, we do have, like any other regulatory board, we do have an interest on what is happening in the profession, what kind of work is being done in the profession, and we get involved in providing guidance, working with the relevant state departments on what needs to be done. Specifically on this matter for smart cities in general and green buildings specifically, from the town planning perspective, it's a welcome move, simply because it's just a logical move for where we are currently as the world, basically, because the logic for us is that urban governance or governance for built environment simply means that at the point we are, the resources that we have in most instances, it's resources that are limited. And we, on one hand, and on the other hand, we have the population that is ever growing. that is dependent on these resources for survival. So we are at a point where everyone is realizing from different fields that are operating in the space that things cannot continue as normal, because there are many challenges that we are now facing simply because the space is remaining the same, and the population is forever growing. And linked to that, it's it's what we need to make our life easy and comfortable, and the kind of things that we're coming up with. I mean, for generations and centuries, we've been developing in every time period with the new initiatives to make life for us in these places better, but that's putting pressure on the environment. And therefore, innovation that is going to look not just at the building itself. I think it's a great thing that we now starting to look at the actual buildings, because in the main, it has been the environment, the design of the environment itself. We're still far from getting that right, but it does not mean that we will have to try to get the environment in general fixed before we can move to other things. I can just part by saying for now that we should appreciate that from the planning point of view, this started in the early 90s already as the country adopting the sustainability conference, adopting the principles for sustainability, and that was put into the government space through the integrated development plans that the planning profession is driving and is responsible for, and it uses the principles of sustainability. And that's what, for us, we must build on and ensure that we operate within that framework.
Okay, thank you very much, there, Mr. Zulu. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have to wrap up. We've only got 5 minutes, so may I ask for your closing remarks? Maybe as you answer, you can tell us, if climate change is rapidly becoming an economic issue, particularly for us as developing countries, and how can we then, adapt to, new strategies and new ways to address climate change. But we've only got 5 minutes, so please keep it as brief as possible. Perhaps let's start with Litiboho, and then we'll have Jessica, then we'll have you, Mr. Nduku, and then we'll have Mr. Decker, and then Mr. Zulu as well. Just maybe 1 or 2 words from your side. Okay. Jessica? I mean, Litiboho, sorry. Litiboho, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Yes, it is actually becoming an economic issue. We've seen an increased and frequency in the severity of climate impacts over the past number of years. We're seeing prolonged and extensive droughts. We're seeing regional and flash floods, tornadoes, things that we're not accustomed to. And the economic impact are costly because they impact on the livelihoods of people, of communities, and they're left even more vulnerable. Infrastructure is damaged, which needs to be replaced. And so that affects the economy in a very significant way. And so I think we really need to focus on building back better, like Jessica mentioned earlier, but building back better in the sense of building in a low carbon approach, and not replacing infrastructure in the traditional way that we've been doing, and that will address the economic impact in the long term. So yes, I'll end off there, and just also like to touch on the aspect of empowering communities and raising awareness, but empowering them and engaging them in a very meaningful way and not as an afterthought. I think that will take us far in the approaches that we want to implement and see in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Litiboho. Thank you for those sentiments. Jessica?
Thanks, Tabang. I completely agree with Litiboho on the economic impacts, and I think one of the other key considerations is affordability moving forward. So one of the things that we're advocating for as a profession is epitomizing the circular economy. And that is looking at substitution and dematerialization as we prioritize things like employment creation through labor-based design and construction as well. And when we have the circular type thinking, it really gives us an opportunity to look at the full ecosystem of goods and services and looking at alternative building technologies and the of pipes and road building materials and those types of things. So I think from our side, from the side of the engineering profession, it really means that low carbon gives us the opportunity to look cradle to cradle rather than a cradle to grave approach. And I seriously believe that lots of the economic challenges that we face can seriously be addressed through the circular thinking.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you, Mr. Ndugu. I don't know if it was Mr. Ndugu or Mr. Decker, but
Yeah.
either. Yeah, please go ahead with your closing remarks.
Yes, I can, yeah, just close by saying that, yeah, I mean, we are a council of architecture architects, so we definitely are looking forward to the initiatives and also the implementation of the objectives of green building practices. And I think the implementation of those can really do a lot to deal with to address the issues of the economy. Because at the moment, as I said, that where I stand as a person is that we need to go back to the basics and just start just using normal basic things that can actually address the issues of sustainability before we look at the most expensive ones. And then once we do that, I think that we need to put everything in place so that from the local authorities, from the designers, I know we do have a Green Building Council in the country, is helping, is trying to achieve, but it's, as Mr. Decker said, it's only for certain buildings that are affordable, maybe from the corporates that can afford. But a normal or just a local or an ordinary person is not benefiting that. We need to bring it down to the local level where everyone can benefit this, and then which means that go back to the basics. Let us use basic life sustainable approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndugu. Mr. Dieka?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, climate change, is it real or not? I think the past few months, especially here at the beginning of lockdown, we have seen how the Earth have reacted against the lesser pollution, etc., that there was. So I can say, and I believe that yes, there's climate change going to happening at the moment. We can see it everywhere, and as professionals, as building owners, etc., we just have to go back, as Charles have said, to do the basics. You know, our forefathers 200 years ago, they did not have electricity, etc. So they built to actually to conserve energy inside the building, not to let it to become too cold in the winter and not too warm in the summer. And 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 yeah, and for me, that is the basics. Go back to the times when there was no electricity to heat up a building on a glass box on the South Pole, or a cool down a glass box on the equator. We just have to go back, both as designers, as professionals, and as the inhabitants of these buildings, um, to comply with, or to comply with this everything, and to make sure that uh, we've got a sustainable environment in future, as what our constitutions say, or promise us that we can have. um, is yeah is not expensive. It is just basically just looking back, turn our back onto what is happening at the moment, and actually go to the past. Doesn't matter who your forefathers were. I think we can learn lessons out of history there, and and make sure that whatever we do is sustainable and actually uh, reduce the carbon footprint. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dieka. We appreciate your sentiment as well. Mr. Zulu, one or two words?
Thank you, ma'am. Let me just say, yes, the impacts, economic impacts is real, private companies, private individuals, and the public. We need to rethink, we are forced to rethink urban design and have the poor in our minds as we're doing that because they are the most mostly affected. And last one is that the implementation of plans is important. And to do that, we must adhere to the principle that budgeting is an allocation of resources to the strategic thinking or to the plans. And if we implement of the plans that we already have in the public sector, I think we'll go a long way in properly managing the challenge we are facing.
Okay. Thank you so much to all of you for those contributions. Truly, truly insightful. You know, substitution, decentralization, how do we rethink and how do we go back to the basics, as you've all indicated? And I do believe that some of the inputs that you have offered will go towards policy formation, but most important, I hope that as a continent and as a country, we become so action oriented and we get things done. And truly, like you said, Mr. Dude, I think on that note of going back to the basics, that's what we need. But how about we say that back to the basics is the new innovation that we can aim to strive for. So thank you to all of you for your time. We truly appreciate it, and we wish you well in your organizations. And let's continue to chart forward and promote issues around sustainability and the developmental agenda. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.